Okay, good morning and welcome to this virtual meeting of the South West Wales Corporate Joint Committee Overview and Scrutiny Subcommittee. Please ensure your phones are switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. In addition, when asked to raise your hand, could you raise your electronic hand so that I can call you in if you have a question as opposed to just waving on the screen, please. Thank you. So, agenda item 2 is Chair's announcements. I have nothing to say this morning. So we'll move on to agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? If members have declarations in relation to any reports on today's agenda, you can please indicate now. Charlotte will email you a copy of the declaration form for you to complete and return. If any declarations become apparent in the meeting, please advise me at the time if you are aware of any. Any declarations of interest? No hands raised. So we'll move on to agenda item 4, minutes of the previous meeting. So the minutes of the 23rd of February 2023 are before us today for accuracy. Do any members have any comments? Okay, if no comments, can I please have a proposer and a seconder to accept the minutes?
I propose, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen.
Happy to second.
And thank you, Councillor Schiavone. So that's our proposer and seconder. So can we all confirm the minutes then? We raise our hands if we're happy with the minutes. Yeah, thank you. Anyone wishing to abstain? Oh, sorry, I'll give you a minute to lower your hands. Okay, so then we have approved the minutes and we can move on to the next item. Agenda item 5, correspondence from the Scrutiny Committee to the Chair of the Corporate Joint Committee. So this is from myself. I, after the last meeting, wrote a letter, as discussed, detailing the concerns of this committee, and we've had the response from the Chair of the CJC. Have any members got any questions or comments on this? No hands raised. Oh, sorry, Councillor John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I just saying it's summed up. I felt your letter summed up the feeling of the meeting last time, and the interesting part in the reply was the chair had said they're pressing Welsh ministers to fully fund the policy, so it would be good perhaps to have an update when they have some information back from Welsh Government on that fully funding part.
Thank you, Councillor John. I agree. I think it was a good response, and it's worth noting that the chair has offered to attend a future meeting to provide further assurances. And I think whilst we'd welcome that, we maybe give the process a bit of time and review things in 6 months' time and see if we've had any improvements then. And then we might invite the chair to a meeting at that point. But does everyone agree that that sounds like a reasonable proposal? Okay, Charlotte will note that then and move on.
Yep, thanks, Chair.
Okay, so item 6, South West Wales Strategic Development Plan. So we have the Officer Kerry Morris will provide an overview to the report, and I'm now going to hand over to Kerry, and then after I've done that, we'll have member questions. Okay, Kerry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Kerry Morris. I'm the Head of Planning and Public Protection for Neath Talbot Council. So, as the Chair has indicated, I'm happy to run through briefly with you the report this morning. As I said, I don't intend to go through it in any detail. Obviously, members have had sight of the report in advance of the meeting, but what I thought I'd do is perhaps draw out some of the key messages and issues perhaps for members to consider this morning. As I said, what the report attempts to do is just provide an update really on what the key components and stages of the strategic development plan are. It touches on what some of the options that are being considered in terms of how we would then set up to deliver that work programme across the authorities. Importantly, perhaps touches on the current sort of issues and risks that we all need to be aware of. And what I wanted to do is provide an overview for members in terms of the good collaborative work that's going on in the background, which ultimately will form some good building blocks for the SDP in the longer term. So in terms of the overview of the SDP, then, as I said, the SDP ultimately should focus only really on wider than local issues, and ultimately it does need to express a vision and deliver a strategy for the area as a whole by definition. Paragraph 5 of the report, which is covered on page 14 of the agenda pack, sort of sets out quite a comprehensive list of the detail and scope that does need to be captured as part of the SDP. And like LDPs, which members I'm sure will be aware of, the policy framework presented in SDPs will need to be fully justified and based on a sound evidence base, and that evidence ultimately will need to be sort of relevant, sort of proportionate and focused, and ideally front-loaded to sort of inform the preferred strategy of the SDP at that stage. Members of Scrutiny will be aware that back in September of last year, the Welsh Government did issue a draft manual which sets out essentially the scope and a guidance document in effect of what Welsh Government's expectations are in terms of what an SDP should present. I'm aware that the CDC did consider that draft manual in its meeting back in December of last year. We do expect a more formal consultation on that document over the course of the summer and autumn this year. I think with the intention for the Welsh Government then is to issue the formal document at the end of the calendar year, end of 2023. So what the SDP essentially sets out is that it identifies that the SDP should be capable of being prepared within sort of a five-year window, and the stages as set out in the report does mirror that of an LDP. So it's very much an identical process, and members who will be familiar with the LDP will know, the significant body of work that will have to go into producing this particular piece of work. Welsh Government do recognise, however, that I think given the complexities of bringing forward a regional document of such a scale, I think there is a recognition that it's prudent and reasonable to assume that certainly the first tranche of SDPs will probably take longer than that 5-year period. As I said, the report does touch on some of the options that are being considered in terms of how we might set up as a region to deliver the SDP. I don't intend to go through them in any detail, but they are set out for members in paragraphs 12 to 16 on page 16 of the agenda pack. What I would say is each of the options, I don't think there's any particularly one perfect option, but each of the options does have its own advantages and disadvantages. But ultimately, whatever option is decided, it will need to be properly resourced, both through finances and staffing, of course. And that perhaps brings us on nicely to perhaps the most important element of the report, which is perhaps identifying what the current risks and challenges are as a region. And there are 3 in total, really, that the report attempts to sort of clarify. Obviously, budget and funding is a critical element, and currently there is no substantive budget available to deliver this comprehensive work programme. So it's difficult at this point in time to set ourselves up as a region in terms of whatever options we do decide ultimately to deliver that work programme. Obviously, existing staff resources and capacity is at a premium. I think particularly in respect of because currently planning officers within each of the local planning authorities that constitute the SDP grouping, we are not able to divert resources away from what we are currently involved in terms of preparing our own replacement LDPs. There's been a very clear steer from Welsh Government in terms of authorities not being able to stall or delay or park their LDPs. So in a sense, the 2 tiers of development plan across the region will have to come through in parallel, and that clearly creates its own challenges going forward in terms of resourcing. I think a big issue also to clarify for members, and members no doubt will be aware of this, is that in terms of the planning profession, there are ongoing recruitment and retention issues in the profession across the board. I don't think any one authority is unique in that sense. So, when we come to set up the team that will ultimately look to deliver the SDP, the CJC will have the same challenges as any local planning authority currently has in terms of filling any vacant posts. And ultimately, of course, given the complexities of the plan, what we need to identify is officers with sufficient experience and technical knowledge to be able to drive the work programme, and those are the posts that the ones that seem to be most difficult to recruit and retain appropriate staff to. So I think over the course of the next 12 months, it's going to be really important to have an ongoing dialogue with the Welsh Government, both in terms of their expectations of what they would want to see from the SDPs coming forward, the timescales, the realistic timescales, and indeed, perhaps most importantly, the potential future funding to deliver this work stream. And I am aware that leaders have already written to the ministers, highlighting these points and the challenges that we've got as collectively going forward. Whilst I think it's fair to say and acknowledge that substantive progress on the SDP won't be achieved until the resource issue is resolved with the Welsh Government, but what I wanted to set out for members this morning is the good, as I said, collaborative work and studies that are ongoing at the moment, both already completed and indeed in progress. I think there's an opportunity and a necessity really to rationalise the approach and the methodologies that individual local planning authorities are applying to developing their local development plan evidence bases. The South Wales Planning Group is well established, and a number of collaborative initiatives and studies have been ongoing, and these work streams are not only informing the individual replacement LDPs coming forward, but as I said right at the outset, they do provide a good, solid and sound building blocks for the SDP when we do start that process in earnest. Again, I don't intend to go through the particular studies in any great detail. The report hopefully provides members with a good understanding and an overview of the collaborative work that has gone and been produced to date and is ongoing, and that will continue, I'm sure, amongst planning officers going forward. As I say, we do, as planning officers, we do meet regularly, and no doubt going forward, as this work continues to gather pace, we'll be meeting perhaps even more regularly than we have done in the past sort of months and year or two. I suppose the last thing I wanted to just end on, perhaps before taking any questions that members might have, is the importance of the SDP both being informed by and being sort of linked to the various other work streams that the CJC will be involved in delivering. Clearly there are strong links in terms of economic development, the energy and the transport functions, and hopefully the report recognises and acknowledges the importance of ensuring that all of these work streams are appropriately interlinked and interwoven, because ultimately they will all need to stand together and present effectively a comprehensive strategy for the region going forward. So that's, Chair, that's really all I really wanted to cover in terms of the summary. I'm happy to take any questions. Either myself, I know Nicola Pearce is also on the call, who's the Director of Environment and Regeneration for Neath Talbot Council. So perhaps between us we can address any questions members might have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Gary. That was very helpful summary of the report. I think there are a few questions from members that I'll take now. Councillor Black.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If anything, this illustrates that the point you raised in the letter to Rob Stewart, which we discussed in the previous item, because we now have a situation where local authorities are developing local development plans, as I understand it, whilst at the same time a 5-year process on a strategic development plan where you're effectively duplicating a lot of the work which is going on with that. And as Mr. Morris has said, this is really resource intensive, particularly in terms of manpower, consultation, etc. It just seems to me that I just don't see the point of duplicating that effort. I mean, I can understand an overarching strategic document which looks at things like energy and the infrastructure for regional infrastructure, but when you start talking about housing and all the other issues, that's all should be covered by the local development plan. And I just don't understand why the local government believe this should be a 5-year process when that work is largely being done for the local development plan. And it seems to me that work could be done in a different way. I'm just incredulous that the Welsh government feels that they have to impose this in this way onto us in addition to the work which goes on the local development plan, which, as everybody knows, is a very, very detailed and stressful process and one which has huge resonances in local communities. That's just my view.
Thank you, Councillor Black. I'd like to bring Councillor Percy in now as well, because he has a relevant point to this as well from the pre-meeting. Thank you, Councillor Percy.
Yeah, diolch cadeirydd. Yeah, so in terms of sort of the interaction between the SDP and the LDPs, I'm still not entirely clear kind of how that is going to work, and I think there's some questions around as we're preparing both concurrently, for example. I'm not sure the situation in all local authorities, but I know we are in Neath Talbot. You know, are we going to be looking to try and align some of the parts of the plan? Is that something that is going to be an aspiration, or are we going to be content with there being maybe a disconnect between, for example, an overall housing target in an LDP and what the regional housing allocation might be? You know, there may be some practical consequences of that. But in terms of the evidence base as well, you know, Councillor Black just sort of raised a lot of work has been going on, and I think, Kerry, you've mentioned a lot of the regional work that's currently happening. But of course, some of that evidence base would be quite old, depending on when the SDP does actually kick off. So although there might maybe be a foundation of or an indication of some of that evidence, we may end up having to repeat that work. It'd be interesting if you've got any more clarity on this, because we've had discussions in other forums on these matters before, and it wasn't very clear at the time, and perhaps I get the impression it's still not clear now. Diolch.
Thank you, Councillor Percy. Just before I bring you in, Kerry, the other point that was relevant to this, I think, was just in terms of the potential options for delivering the SDP that you mentioned on page 16 in the report. Did you have a preferred option in your thing? But that was just a summary. So if we could, I'll bring you back in now, Kerry. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillors Black and Percy, for your comments and questions. They're all very pertinent ones and ones that I certainly agree with in terms of the challenges. I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of the challenges that we've got. As I said, it is a huge challenge to bring both tiers of development plan through in parallel, because, you know, the other complication is obviously the constituent local authorities across the region are at different stages of their plan preparation process. As an example, I know that Carmarthenshire, for example, are at deposit stage, and ourselves at Neath Talbot, we are only now heading towards the preferred strategy stage. So there is, you know, that has its own challenges, and that's why it's important that there is collaborative work going on in the background, because what we're trying to achieve in that work is create consistent methodologies that can be built upon and updated accordingly, so it won't need to start from scratch, and if you like, as and when authorities get to different stages of the process. I think the alignment of the SDPs and LDPs and ultimately Future Wales is an important one that Councillor Percy has raised. The requirements of the regulations dictate that each tier of development plan below the one above has to be in conformity. So ultimately, the LDPs, the respective LDPs, need to be in conformity with the SDP, and the SDP ultimately needs to be in conformity with Future Wales as the top tier development plan. So that all has to align and fit together ultimately in terms of that process. So as I say, it is a very, very big challenge in terms of the timescales, how they all fit together, and when the evidence base comes forward. Touching on some of the options that the report presents in terms of how we may or may not set up as a region, no decision has yet been made collectively in terms of how that might happen. I'm happy to give you my personal opinion of what might be an appropriate way forward, which is for the CJC to set up essentially a separate bespoke team that would sit independent of local planning authorities. But having said that, that option itself has its own disadvantages, because you've got to ask the question, where are you going to get the expertise from? You've got the danger of, when you set up that team as a CJC, you could effectively end up cherry picking the best of what individual local authorities have got in terms of their staff resource and expertise. So that would then have a knock-on effect on the individual local planning authorities in terms of their own LDPs. But I mean, and again, going back to the point of the level of detail, going back to Councillor Black's initial comment around almost duplication of effort, if you like. I think the Welsh Government view is that once an SDP is in place, the SDP will ultimately deal with and present all of the key major overarching issues that the region will need to deal with, and as a consequence, any LDP lights, as they're called, that would then sit under the SDP would be much more less detailed documents, because all of the strategy, all of the big key allocations, the housing apportionment, the employment land apportionment, gypsy and traveller apportionment, that would all sit at the regional level, because in the Welsh Government's wisdom, having sat through what would have been 25 examinations in public across Wales, they obviously saw an opportunity to perhaps cut through all of that detail, get it into one sort of 2 or 3 tiers at the regional status, and then that would sort of reduce the level of work overall across the board in Wales. But I do take your point, Councillor Black, that I think it's going to be really difficult initially. I think when we don't have an SDP in place. Once an SDP is in place, then I think the horizon will probably become a little bit more clearer. But between that now and that point is going to be an extremely difficult and challenging period for us all, I think. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kerry. Councillor White and John, I know you're waiting. Just wait for a little bit longer, please. Nicola, did you want to come in at this point?
If you wouldn't mind, I was just going to add to what Kerry said, and for those of us on the call or on the meeting that have been involved in planning for decades, and I include myself in that group. If you remember, prior to reorganisation back in 1996, there was the structure plan system and the local plan systems. The old county councils were responsible for developing the structure plan, and in that you had all the strategic allocations, the population projections, and therefore the requirement for housing provision, and each of the local planning authorities then developed their local plans based on that information. And what Welsh Government seemed to be doing is trying to go full circle back to that system that was in place at that time, and basically the SDP is the old structure plan. Now, we as officers across Wales have indicated that in order for us to get that SDP in place, would they be prepared to remove what is known as the drop dead date in relation to LDPs. So the LDPs stop working at that drop dead date. So we cannot use the policies within the LDPs once that local plan has expired. We asked whether they could withdraw that position so that we could concentrate our efforts on getting the STPs up and running, and then we could then move on to the LDP lights as described by Kerry. And they have confirmed on multiple occasions that they're not prepared to do that. Now, I think that it's worth pursuing that further at a political level, because it does not seem sensible for us to continue in the way we are unless it's appropriately funded. And as Kerry mentioned earlier on, it's not just about financial resource, it's about staff resource. And at the moment, in terms of planning and in terms of lots of other professions that are involved in local authorities, it's really, really difficult to get staff at a senior level who can hit the ground running. So I just wanted to mention that, and thank you for allowing me to speak, Chair.
Thank you, Nicola. That's very helpful. Councillor Percy, did you want to come back before I take the questions from Councillor John White?
Yes, please, Chair, if that's okay. Only briefly. No, again, thanks, Kerry and Nicola, for that. I think, Nicola, you've just touched on my thoughts around the issues around the timing of the SDP and the LDPs, in the sense that we're currently preparing full LDPs and going to embark on preparing an SDP. You know, that is quite unfortunate, isn't it? And I think the position you've set out, perhaps of delaying the LDP work until the SDP was done, does seem, on the face of it at least, sensible. So it is unfortunate that's not been the position of Welsh Government, and yeah, I'd be interested if there's any movement on that. But of course, some local authorities are so far advanced in their LDP process, it wouldn't really be that applicable to them, I'm sure. I have a follow-up question to Kerry, just around conformity between the plans and the hierarchy. I'm assuming that applies once the SDP has been adopted. So would that be at the end of the process, or do we have, as we have perhaps with the LDPs, once the evidence thing starts to emerge, will there be a point where we try and get that conformity going at an earlier stage? It'd be helpful if you could clarify that. Diolch.
I'm happy to come back quickly on that, Chair, just to clarify that point. You know, the simple answer to that is that, as is the case with any of the two tiers of development plan that we're talking about, whether it be LDP or SDP, it's only at the point of adoption, once we've gone through a process of examination with an independently appointed inspector, that you know, ultimately that conformity then is confirmed. You know, I know we've had previous discussions around the extent of, I suppose, evidence base as it comes forward, the status of it in terms of its detail, and whether or not certain elements of evidence base can become essentially a material consideration in the development management process. I think the answer to that question is yes. You know, because obviously sometimes evidence can become dated quite quickly. So once new evidence emerges, then yes, I would suggest you could, as part of the decision-making process, apply an element of material consideration to evidence base. But ultimately, when we're talking about the development plan itself, it's only at the point of adoption that conformity then needs to align with those tiers above.
Thank you, Kerry. A quick follow-up question, I think, from Councillor Black.
Yeah, apologies. There's just a quick one. The LDP is I think a 15-year life. What's the potential life of the SDP?
It's 30 years.
30 years. Okay,
30
thank
years,
you.
yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Black. I assume with that, there'd be, like the LDP, there'd be a process of review and change over the 30 years because things, you know, things might change in a 30-year timescale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, as I said, the SDP and LDP process as we currently know it are quite identical. There will be, once the SDP is adopted, there will be a requirement to annually monitor the policy framework, and ultimately there will be a review mechanism built in. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Councillors Black and Councillor Percy. Thanks for your patience. I'm not sure who was first. I think it was Councillor White who had his hand up first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wallace. Yeah, what really is the methodology behind Welsh Government when to have sort of two policies running parallel? As I say, why, you know, if we got the experts within local government, within the service, why don't they let you get on with getting the job done? You know, but my concern is, we've all already got our LDPs back out and going through different stages, and more importantly, what I'd like to find out is, have you been given any indication in regards to the issue around TAN 15, because quite a few sites will be affected by this new policy. So I understand ministers due to make an announcement in June, I gather, after it was deferred following concerns from leaders of all councils regarding the information within the original TAN 15 information. So are you able to, have you been given any indication that the minister will be actually making an announcement on this in June, or is it going to be sort of asked, being taken back any further? Thank you, Mr. Morris.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you, Councillor White. If I perhaps take the Welsh Government's thought process first, as I say, I'll try and get in their head. I think, as I said, going back to perhaps part of my previous answer, I think Welsh Government officers, officials obviously have sat through 25 or so examinations in public in terms of the first tranche of LDPs. You know, clearly they're in the best position to see whether there are, you know, clearly there are common issues, common challenges, and common risks associated with individual local development plans. And I think, there is a degree of method in their madness, in the sense that, a lot of these issues that individual local planning authorities are grappled with are larger than local issues. You could argue that administrative boundaries are arbitrary. There are wider travel to work issues. There were a wider housing market areas. A lot of the issue, gypsies and travellers, waste issues, mineral sort of extraction. They're all issues that really, on the basis of it, are larger than local issues. So I think what the SDP is trying to deliver ultimately is a more joined up process. I mean, one of the tests of soundness for any local development plan is that it aligns with neighbouring authorities. So it is essentially sort of formalising that process, which is already in place as we speak anyway. So, you can understand why Welsh Government have taken the planning system down this route, because ultimately they see it as a real sort of positive way forward. But what the Welsh Government are perhaps failing to acknowledge and appreciate at the moment are the logistical challenges that come with delivering that regional tier development plan. And I don't necessarily think they perhaps fully appreciate the level of and scope of work that is involved in bringing forward that development plan. Just to touch on the question around TAN 15, all members and officers on the call will be aware that this has generated significant concern and interest. Obviously, the understanding at the moment, or at least the understanding that we had, was that Welsh Government and the ministers sort of had a bit of a red line, and whilst the original TAN 15 as drafted was withdrawn, requiring further consultation, that has now recently ended. My understanding is that whilst it was or is the minister's intention to publish the document in June of this year, I believe, what we are currently hearing as officers is that as a consequence of the further extent of comments that Welsh Government have received as a consequence of the latest consultation on the changes to the draft, it is now highly likely that we will all receive communication very shortly from the minister confirming that the publication of TAN 15 will be inevitably delayed as a consequence. So, broadly, there were, as I said, there were significant concerns in terms of the early draft. We're all appraised of those. But what is positive, I think, is the revised draft that has been issued. The Welsh Government have listened to the concerns. I think, the broad, significant concerns that have been raised have been addressed. I think the issue now is more about some of the nuances and the definitions that have been applied in the document as updated. Perhaps need a little bit more tweaking just to make sure that there are no unintended consequences as they were clearly set out in the draft. So that's my understanding of where things stand.
Thank you, Kerry.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Councillor White. Sorry. Excellent. So we'll move on. Councillor John, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I find myself agreeing with the points made by Councillors Black and Percy at the start, really, and I think a lot of the questions have been answered. I mean, Welsh Government are trying to, well, not trying, they are imposing this this level of structure, including this SDP, on councils without any funding, and it really should, it's got to be highlighted every opportunity on that, because I mean it needs people to be able to spend the time on this. I think Nicola summed it up really. Welsh Government are going back to what was happening back in the 90s with an overarching policy for an area where local authorities will be sort of diminishing in responsibilities underneath, which is unfortunate, because that's arguments we've all fought for probably in our own areas. And this is one of my concerns really is, and I'll pick up on housing because it's mentioned throughout the SDP. I mean, really, I'd like to know how would the interaction between authorities would work, because each authority will have its own needs and wants in particular areas. Somewhere like Fishguard down in Pembrokeshire might be totally different to Neath or Port Talbot. I mean, that area, and when it's an overarching larger policy where the strategic side might say we need more homes in this particular area, it could be at the detriment of some more rural or remote areas, which I would represent. I wouldn't want to see, for example, different parts of authorities competing for their parts of the LDP to be included in this overarching plan. It would go against local politics, if you like, and we've all heard in our own areas about keeping democracy close to the voters, and that's what we fight for. And this is perhaps taking it a bit away, but that's my concerns really, rather than a question. One point I'd make really, most of my questions were answered in Kerry's response to the initial queries. So I mean, I appreciate that was very, very thorough. So thank you very much for that. One point I would make is it's been mentioned there's 22 authorities and 3 national parks in Wales, and the 2 national parks covered under this area are represented at CJC when decisions are made, but they're not here on scrutiny. So a question really for, I don't know if it's for this meeting or not, but perhaps Chair, you could take it away, but should national parks have representation at scrutiny, because this will affect the national parks as well? So just something going forward. No specific question. I thank the 2 officers for the presentations and the answers already given, because my points have more or less been answered in those. It is concerned that some decisions and parts of the plans will be taken away from where they might be needed in the eyes of local people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor John. I believe Craig is going to come in on the national parks query. You're on mute, I think, Craig.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just to answer Councillor John's question there, national parks are going to be representative on the scrutiny committee. The CJC have agreed to extend 1 representative to both the Pembrokeshire National Park and Brecon Beacons. Apologies, I can't remember the new name now, but I should be calling it Brecon Beacons, of course. But I have to look that up. We're just waiting now for the co-option agreement ultimately to be signed, and I would hope that by the time of the next scrutiny meeting, we will have national park representatives with us.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Kerry, for the report. I think it's interesting. Councillor Black mentioned it much, at the start of the discussion. There is similar issues to what the reason we wrote the letter in our last meeting to the chair of CJC. But I think it's clear the CJC are aware of the issue themselves with the resources and hoping for a response from Welsh Government. I'd welcome the fact that the SDP has a long time frame in terms of delivery, and that it's also anticipated it might be longer than 5 years, because as everyone said, it's going to be such a crucial document for various reasons, and it needs to take into account all of our different authorities and the needs of those. So very useful summary of the report. Thank you, Kerry. And unless we've got anything else on this item or any other questions, I think we can move on. Charlotte, is that right?
Yes, Chair, that's right. The item is for noting on this occasion.
Yeah, I thought so. Lovely. Thank you very much. So no other questions. I'll move on to agenda agenda item 7. So South West Wales Energy Strategy Update. Stephen Jones will provide an overview of the report. As discussed, members received the action plan spreadsheet only a few minutes before the meeting started because of a technical issue with the report pack. So we may bring this item back once we've had an opportunity to effectively review that pack afterwards. But I look forward to the presentation. Stephen, if I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, members. Just by way of introduction, I'm Stephen Jones, Director of Community Services down here at Pembrokeshire. But I also wear the hat as Chair of the Regional Energy Core Group, about which I'll speak a bit more detail as I go through the report. And it's on the basis of myself chairing the Regional Energy Core Group that this report has been drafted, and it's intended to provide, as you say, an update to the Scrutiny Committee on regional energy strategy and developments across the energy agenda that impact on the region. Just by way of a few introductory comments before I sort of walk and talk Scrutiny members through the report. The purpose here really is to try and make sense of what is an extraordinarily dynamic and complex and fast-moving picture, which is the whole energy agenda, from the local up to the global, everything from climate change, net zero targets, decarbonisation, so on and so forth, renewable energy. It is very difficult to make sense of it all with a multiplicity of targets, plans, projects, initiatives, all going on at the same time in what I would broadly define as the energy space. So it is some challenge to try and put any structure and shape to it, but that's what I've attempted to do. Just briefly, also from a local government perspective, I guess it should be worth noting that this is also a very, very exciting field to be involved with currently. Having said that, the sort of juxtaposition between the scale of the challenge and opportunities alongside the existing resource levels, more about which later, I guess, is one of the defining features of the support for energy across local government currently. I think I'm right in saying there are probably only a handful of staff who are full-time employed across the 4 local authorities as energy managers in various guises. And yet, if you asked many people on the Pembroke Omnibus what their key priorities are, I'm pretty sure net zero climate change would be up in amongst the top 3, 4 or 5 for most people. So there is a bit of an issue, a tension between the scale and size of this agenda and the amount of resource that is being deployed. And of course, going forward in terms of the broader local government budget constraints, it's difficult perhaps to see how additional resources can be directed to support this endeavour. But that's really all by way of setting the scene. So what's the report all about? Well, it is, as I say, designed to provide some assurance to Scrutiny members that in and amongst this sort of snowstorm or tsunami of energy initiatives that are going on, there is a plan for the region, and I think that's important to stress. And below that regional plan, we are developing a suite of local plans. And I think just at the regional level, it's very important to draw the line and the link between this regional energy agenda and what you were discussing at your last meeting in terms of the regional economic agenda. They are very much integrated, energy and economy, and indeed, as you'll see in paragraph 3 or 2 of the report, rather, one of the key missions of the regional economic agenda is, in fact, to create South West Wales as a UK leader in renewable energy. And there's a very, very good reason why that energy and economy agendas are, in a sense, two sides of the same coin, because, as you'll see also in the report, South West Wales is the second largest emitter across the whole of the UK, because of the legacy of historical heavy industry and energy developments across the Southwest. It is acknowledged and recorded as being the second biggest emitter in the UK. So there's a huge challenge to decarbonise those industries in the region. But likewise, there is a huge opportunity to exploit within the region, particularly perhaps in terms of the floating offshore wind agenda, about which we'll say a little bit more later on, but also in broader renewable opportunities, including hydrogen and carbon capture and storage as well. You'll see a reference in the report there to work that the South Wales Industrial Cluster are doing. That is broader than just the South West region. That does spread across the whole of South Wales, but it is acknowledged, as I say, that we've got a major challenge in terms of transitioning heavy industry in South West Wales. So in terms of the report, it's sort of broken down into a number of main sections, the first of which, after the introduction and context, deals with plans. And as already mentioned, the region has a energy plan, an energy strategy that the CJC did sign off on about 12 months ago. That regional energy strategy has been prepared with input from a broad range of stakeholders, if I can use that phrase, across the energy sector. It's been coordinated by the Regional Energy Core Group and has been now adopted by the CJC as the Regional Energy Plan. Below the Regional Energy Plan, there is work going on to produce local area energy plans for each of the 4 local authorities. In fact, in Pembrokeshire, we were part of a national pilot, UK pilot for local area energy plans. So we finished ours last year, but across Carmarthenshire, Swansea, Neath, Talbot, work is underway currently with consultancy support to develop local area energy plans, which will sit in a sort of Russian doll sense underneath the regional energy plan. And those local energy plans will provide details on the scenarios and the optimum roadmap for each local authority area to get to net zero carbon over the time frame. So in terms of plans, we are reasonably well positioned with a regional energy plan and a suite of local energy plans being produced that will provide the mechanism really for coordinating activity, not just between the local authorities, but also between the other stakeholders, both at a local and a regional level. Moving on from the sort of planning context to the second sort of key focus in the report, which is around emerging opportunities. And I need to stress that it's the picture is so dynamic, it's almost impossible to capture everything that's going on at any particular time. And all I've attempted to do in this report is just to highlight a number of key regional scale developments, opportunities that are pregnant, that are about to unlock their potential over the next few years and are really critical in terms of that transition to become a UK renewable energy centre. Some examples that I've given include the recent Freeport announcement, the Celtic Freeport, which combines the two port authorities at Port Talbot and Milford Haven with the two local authorities, Neath, Port Talbot and Pembrokeshire, into a free port that is designed to unlock the potential, particularly in the floating offshore wind sector. And you'll see reference in there to the Crown Estates announcement of up to 4 gigawatts of offshore wind in the Celtic Sea that is outlined over the next generation, really 20 to 25 years. And the two deep water ports, their supply chains are very well placed to unlock the potential to create jobs, support new businesses. And in essence, that's what the free port is designed to do by providing tax incentives to help companies invest, locate their activities in and around sites adjacent to Milford Haven and ABP, Associated British Ports, and Port Talbot more generally to the east of the region. If it delivers to its full potential, we're talking something in the region of 16,000 jobs that the free port could generate over the next 25 years. A company will be set up to manage the free port across the two areas, with that particular focus, as I say, to generate new investment, create prosperity, particularly focused on the potential for local communities. And interestingly, both the ports are located in community areas where there's significant deprivation. So the challenge therefore is how can we upskill, improve education, improve employment opportunities for those communities living very much in the shadow of these huge multinational, huge energy opportunities at both Port Talbot and in Pembrokeshire. But to be absolutely clear, it's not just about the east and west of the region. The sort of free port acknowledges there will be, in essence, a corridor between the two, and that will provide supply chain opportunities for the whole of the region. And of course, it's not just the free port that we're focusing on here. I make reference in the report to the Swansea Bay City Deal suite of projects, and 3 of those projects in particular have an energy focus. The Homes as Power Stations project, which is a regional project looking at retrofitting and new technologies to improve the carbon footprint of housing. There is the Pembroke Dock Marine project, which is all about modernisation and providing the academic and commercial and technological support to de-risk new developments. And there is the Supporting Innovation and Low Carbon Growth project based in Neath, Port Talbot as well, and a Centre for Net Zero Skills potentially on the back of that. In addition, there's a regional City Deal skills and talent project that has already started to get to address the challenge around reskilling or creating new skilling opportunities for local school children, years 11 to 13, work experience opportunities. So the colleges and the Regional Learning and Skills Partnership are already beginning to plug into this energy agenda as well. On top of the free port and on top of the Swansea Bay deal, and you'll see a reference in Swansea Bay to assessing the carbon reduction impacts that the suite of City Deal projects are delivering. On top of that, there's a range of other potentially supersized projects from the Global Centre of Rail Excellence, again at Neath, Port Talbot, through to Blue Eden Tidal Lagoon in Swansea, across to the Circular Economy Centre of Excellence in Carmarthenshire, Nantucket, and those really are just a small selection of projects that, and I think this is the key, that these are projects that the local authorities themselves have been instrumental in enabling, facilitating, and in some cases delivering. Because I think there is potentially an argument to say, well, we don't need to do anything as local authorities. Business will lead on this, and to a large extent that is probably going to be true. It'll be some very large scale global companies who will commit to significant investments, particularly in the Freeport sites, and some of this activity will happen irrespective of a regional plan or irrespective of a regional core group. But I think we can demonstrate that as a region, as 4 local authorities, as CJC, working together through examples like the Freeport, through examples like the Swansea Bay City deal and other major projects, the 4 local authorities can and will make a difference as well. And that's on top, of course, of the individual requirements each authority has in terms of meeting the public sector 2030 net zero targets that as local authorities we're all involved in. So emerging opportunities is a significant feature. And then finally, the report tries to deal with the question, well, just how will we manage all this? And that does bring us back, as I say, to the fact that we've got a strategy that's been adopted. We've got now commitment politically and at chief executive level and through the CJC for an energy subcommittee. The fact that we've got local energy plans being developed, the fact that we've got an energy core group, and there are terms of reference included in the report for the energy core group. And it's just worth perhaps pausing slightly there and talking a little bit more about the core group. As I mentioned in the introduction, I chair that. It is supported not just by the 4 local authorities, but also by the Welsh Government's Energy Service and representation from CJC Officer Corps and from the Swansea Bay City deal as well. You'll see in terms of the terms of reference that for the core group that there is an advisory group, and that's made up of all the key interests from the utility companies through to the registered social landlords, through to Transport for Wales and the ports, etc. So they've all been engaged in developing the strategy. They all plug into the core group on a 6-monthly basis as advisors. So we have that network in place. I guess it's still fairly early days. It's probably 2.5 years, but the network is getting stronger. The strategy is helping to coordinate that activity, and the core group continues to do its work, which is to now produce the action plan, which, to come back to your introductory comments, Chair, is the bit that's been will need to be reformatted or just been reformatted. The action plan has just over 50 specific actions that have been identified through the core group, through the strategy work, and we will look to populate the action plan. It's still very much in its draft format. Look to populate that over the next few weeks and months, provides mechanisms for monitoring the action plan as well, and it'll be that we would look to bring back to meetings of the CJC Energy Subcommittee on a regular basis and Scrutiny Committee as well. So the core group is there doing its work, supported by the advisory panel. That feeds in then to a regional directors group that then feeds into the energy subcommittee and the corporate joint committee, and you'll see a little triangle model in the terms of reference that illustrates how all that is designed to work. So lots going on in terms of plans, lots going on in terms of opportunities, lots going on in terms of understanding and managing that at the regional level. Just 1 or 2 final points. To come back to the resourcing matter and picking up the points that Kerry was making on the strategic planning side. In terms of the CJC support, it is understandably limited because they've adopted the continuity budget, so there's very little additional resources available through the CJC to support work on the energy agenda, and that's reflected therefore in the action plan, the corporate plan priority actions for the energy section that are listed in paragraph 27 of the report. But pleasingly, the Welsh Government have stepped up. They have been supporting not just the production of the strategies, but they've also now approved a 300,000 grant that will enable the 4 local authorities to recruit some additional staff specific to support the energy agenda. That will help us to complete the work on the action plan. It'll also help us to continue the work on the communications plan that's attached as an appendix. That's also seen as being important because, like all strategies, they have their moment when they're launched, and then very quickly they can get sort of shelved and forgotten about. We are very clear as a core group that we need a communications plan to keep the awareness, the visibility of the regional energy strategy alive right across the key stakeholders in the region. So the communications plan is seen as an important component of all that. And then finally, just a couple of concluding comments. It is very difficult, as I said at the start, to try and make sense of everything that's going on here. But it does strike me, if I sort of take a sort of CJC perspective here, that for the first time that I can recall, by developing an integrated approach to energy and economy that I've highlighted, but also transport, which is a key component of that energy and economy agenda, and planning, which you've just heard about, is critical in terms of how these developments will play out across the region. We really have, I think, for the first time, all the pieces in the jigsaw to create a integrated regional approach to development. And it won't happen overnight, I'm sure, but I think the CJC really is in the best place over time to ensure that those elements do lock in together and create a more prosperous and successful region. And energy's got a major role to play in all that. Thank you very much, Chair. As I say, in the future, we'll come back both to scrutiny and to the subcommittee with updates on the action plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That was a very useful overview of your report. Thank you very much. It's very detailed. And I just open up if members have got any questions. Councillor John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Stephen. Just picking up on that £350,000 grant, I picked up on that. It's on page 20 to 30, I think it is. That 350,000, where did that go to? Did that go to a specific authority to hire staff on behalf of the CJC or for this project? I mean, how many staff is that representing, and is that a one-off grant, or are those future costs then going back on whichever authority that it went to? Because it's great to have that up front to recruit staff, but they're going to be paid then going onwards.
Yeah, it is, to be fair, a sort of sticking plaster solution. The 300,000 has gone to Carmarthenshire as the accountable body, but the intention is that recruitment will take place across all 4 authorities. I say intention because when we had our last meeting of the core group 2 weeks ago, the update was that Carmarthenshire were just going through the job evaluation, I think, for the posts. Once they're signed off, we will be in recruitment, and there will be additional posts available across the 4 local authorities. Funding, I think, is for 2 years. I think I'm correct in saying. So it will certainly help us to get on top of the action plan and the communications plan. And I would hope that in a further 2 years' time, there will be other opportunities to support additional funding. And I should emphasise the point that we have also bid to the UK government for Innovate UK funding as well for 2 projects. One to access a £6 million grant that would be available to small and medium-sized enterprises in the region to undertake improvements to their facilities and products to make them less carbon intensive, etc. And the second funding application is about support working with Swansea University, I think, to on the research side. So there are funding opportunities out there, but each of them is specific to a set of generally sort of government set objectives, and we're looking to how best to use those to meet the opportunities and the challenges that we've got in the region. It would be nice to think perhaps in a couple of years' time that the public sector more generally and local authorities specifically are in perhaps a better place to enable ourselves to bolster our own energy teams, because as I mentioned at the introduction, I think there probably is only a handful of staff across the 4 local authorities currently employed as energy managers or variants of that. So yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor John, do you want to come back?
Just one point, and not to do with that. This is just it could be a typo, Stephen, unless Pembrokeshire is well ahead. But on page 28, point 12 about local area energy plans, it said Pembrokeshire completed it in summer 2002. Should that be 22?
It should. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. Just for accuracy of the report, that's all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor John. Councillor White.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Jones. Yeah, 1 or 2 points really. In regards to our target of 2030 locally, you mentioned transport. How are the authorities coping with where we are really so far with like Swansea got the policy on green fleet to make sure we get our fleet actually converted or over to I know some of it in hydrogen, some obviously we got electrics vehicles as well, and we've of course installed the power points as well across certain areas within the city, car parking areas and places like that. And also in regards to the houses power stations, I know that we have built some in Swansea, Neath, Talbot, but how are other authorities faring with this? Are we able to advise us on that?
Thank you very much, Councillor White. You are right to highlight transport. That is one of the key challenges and opportunities again facing the region. When we did the regional energy strategy back a couple of years ago now, it was identified that the car usage is high in some respects in the southwest because of the predominance of the sort of rural communities and the relative lack of an integrated transport system, public transport system. And we'll all be familiar, I guess, with some of the initiatives going on around, as you say, EVs and potential for hydrogen as well. At the moment, I'm probably going to say it would be better for the transport colleagues to provide an update on whether or not those transport targets that we are looking at for reducing carbon footprints are being managed on a local authority basis, or rather are there opportunities for the 4 authorities to coordinate their activity in a more integrated way. Certainly at the in terms of the hierarchy, in terms of the Swansea Bay Metro, there is an integrated approach to transport planning, and that will be progressing through the regional transport plan. But in terms of specific initiatives around decarbonising transport and the rollout of EV charging points, my sense is that still perhaps a little bit lacks a little bit of integration at the regional level because funding is coming directly from Welsh Government to each individual local authority. In terms of the Homes as Power Stations project, again, it would probably be best if a colleague from that sector provided an update, and we can certainly do that for your next meeting or by written reps if required. The project is now in delivery. I'm not, as I say, I don't manage that project, so I don't know if there's anybody on the call who's got a detailed understanding of where that. I know Nicola's got a hand up. She could probably help address that particular point.
Thank you,
Are you happy
Stephen.
for
Thank
me
you,
to come
Nicola.
in, Chair? Sorry.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, the Homes as Power Stations project, as Stephen's indicated, it is a regional project. We've had a few problems trying to recruit staff to that service, so that has delayed delivery, but we are up and running now. We are currently, we've just procured Cardiff University to do the monitoring and evaluation of the projects which have already been delivered, and they were called pipeline projects, and they're monitoring those developments at the moment to identify what form of technology actually provides the biggest bang for your buck. So what is providing the biggest return on our investment, and the biggest impacts for the occupiers or owners of those properties. And we'll use that knowledge then to try and inform any investment decisions that we make from the financial incentives funds, because it's quite a small fund. So we need to ensure that we make the correct investments. So we don't want to invest in technology that provides a small improvement, as opposed to holding back a little bit until we have that data to identify what's best in what area and in what sort of climatic sort of context. So that's why we were hanging back on that front. We're also in the process of setting up a knowledge hub, and we are finding that developers are more interested in that knowledge hub than financial incentives, believe it or not, because what we are finding is that a lot of house builders are developing their own sort of business cases, and they're learning from mistakes that they have experienced on certain sites. But they're not necessarily sharing that information. And if we need to decarbonise our environment and address fuel poverty and reduce our energy consumption and energy wastage, we need to learn from mistakes from others. So we need to develop that information hub, so that we can demonstrate what lessons have been learned from all of those pipeline projects, so that developers don't repeat the same mistakes. So it's about creating that environment where people and developers are comfortable in sharing their mistakes, so that we can fast forward the pace of delivery. So all of that is being established at the moment. We have got a regular programme board associated with this particular project, and I'm more than happy to arrange at a future date, if somebody is interested, I'm more than happy to organise for an update specifically in relation to the benefits that we're securing from HAPS as it progresses through the delivery stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Yeah, very useful comments, very interesting. I think as far as the HAPS goes, it's certainly be interesting to see the 5,000 jobs as well that the project aims to deliver, and quantifying that in terms of delivery. I know it's difficult because it's a regional project, but that certainly very exciting potential with the HAPS project, and I think we'd welcome an opportunity for you to come back and give us a bit more of an update on how that's progressing now it's into delivery stage. Any questions from any other members? I had a question. Sorry, Siri thought that was me talking to my watch. So I just have a question. I mean, for me, my concern with the regional energy plan is just in terms of delivery and actually meeting the targets of net zero, we've got 6.5 years left, and I think a sense of urgency. I certainly feel a sense of urgency in terms of trying to actually make progress in these things. And I think, Stephen, you've outlined some really interesting emerging opportunities. My frustration, I guess, would be that they're still emerging opportunities as opposed to delivered, decarbonisation. I'd welcome your thoughts on that in terms of the timeline. I think if you think we're heading in the right direction, please, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, where do I start? I guess with some of the comments from the regional energy strategy, which are along the lines that business as usual isn't going to get us to where we need to be in the time scale. If we keep on the current trajectory, I think we'll overshoot by something like 15 to 20 years, I think was the prediction. So there has to be a step change. We're seeing incrementally that taking place, but I would concur with your view that the sort of overall speed of development isn't where it needs to be, given the size of the challenge. And of course, it does acknowledge to a degree that governments themselves have been slow to react and sending mixed messages, continuing to send mixed messages, be that new licenses for gas and oil in the North Sea, or what we've seen recently with behaviour resistance as well from communities. The London borough, I think there are 5 London boroughs currently judicially reviewing the decision for ultra low emission zones in the city, and there is resistance. There is inbuilt resistance for wind turbines, as we've read about in England over many years. So none of this is particularly easy. And when you factor in short-term government thinking and funding and behavioural change, then I think most realists and pragmatists would say we're not going to get there in the timescale that we have set. At the local authority level, I think some sort of preliminary work that we have been doing on just the costs to get to the 2030 net zero target for local authorities are eye-watering. I think Swansea have done some work initially that I think costed it around about 180, 190 million. Pembrokeshire have done work on a similar basis. It's looking more like 50 to 60 million, I think, with the figures I saw here. And that's for us to get to our 2030 net zero targets. It's difficult to see in the current climate that that scale of investment is going to be available over the next few years. But I guess things can change, things will change, things will accelerate. Certainly in terms of the private sector, we are now picking up an awful lot of interest. And I'm sure that's the case across local authorities in most parts of the country, a lot of interest for renewable energy developments, large scale and small scale. What we're not seeing yet, I think, is much in the way of developments on the heat pump side, and that is a huge issue in this region in particular. The £5,000 incentives, I think there are currently for heat pumps, don't seem to be making that investment decision attractive for lots of homeowners. So there's a multitude of initiatives, many of which the public aren't aware of. So there's a whole communications challenge wrapped up in this as well. But it's but I go back to your earlier comments. My view is currently we're not on track to deliver this, and I think we just have to hope and put pressure and lobby that governments start to accelerate their support for this agenda.
Thank you. Members, can I suggest a letter to the CJC chair to highlight our concerns on the scale of investment that's available and also the need to accelerate the pace of the decarbonisation? Might be a useful thing that we can do to try and help put a little bit of pressure on the system. Has anyone got any comments on that? Would we all be happy to do that? Can I see you raise your hands then, please, just to confirm? Thank you. Okay, great. Charlotte, we can do that afterwards.
Yeah,
We can
that's
talk about
fine.
that.
We'll work
Okay.
out the arrangements outside the meeting. That's all right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephen, for that answer. I think I'm glad you share my concerns on that point. Okay. And if there's no other questions, we can move on to agenda item 8. No, good. Let's move on to agenda item 8 then. For this, I'm going to hand over to Charlotte.
Yes, Chair, it's just in relation to the forward work programme. As you can see, I haven't attached it on this occasion, and that's just because this is our last meeting for this cycle of meetings for this year. When we have the annual meeting where further dates are agreed for 23-24, what we'll do is we'll have a forward work programme session just to allow yourselves again to meet and kind of populate your forward work programme and plan what items you want to discuss in the next coming year. So I just wanted to kind of give a brief overview as to why it wasn't there on this occasion.
Okay. Thank you. That makes sense to me. I think the only item that we, is the agenda item 7, the action plan, definitely that we need to bring forward.
Yeah.
Next time, because we haven't had a chance to review. Members haven't had a chance to look at it properly before then, scrutinising it. But I don't have anything else to add at the moment on that. That was the spreadsheet that we've received this morning from you.
Yeah.
Okay. So unless there's anything else,
We've had no urgent items either, Chair.
No urgent items. Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this morning. I think for the quality of the questions and the debate was certainly very interesting, and hope you've had a good morning. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the sunshine this afternoon, and close the meeting. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye,
Thanks,
Chair.
Chair.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Chair.
you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.